Thank you for joining us today for Media Frenzy Part 1.
That's right.
Is there frenzy today? There certainly is, related to what's going on in the world of media. Now, we're certainly not against media, right?
No, we're using media right now.
We're using it right now.
We use it every day.
Has an amazing potential. But we're talking today about some of the real pitfalls of media, because many times we get drawn into it and we end up spending way more time than maybe we should be spending. And it can actually turn into a frenzy, right?
It can. I mean, it's compulsive, right? You just have to have more and more and more.
So let's talk about what that word frenzy looks like.
Okay.
Just some descriptive words.
Passionate.
Craze. Fury.
Uncontrollable responses.
Emotions. Mania. Turmoil. Now, I can give you a simple example. If you want to find out what a frenzy can feel like, we're aware of several examples where there's been, and it's not just teenagers, but this happened to be a teenager, where the parents just felt like that teen was on the device all the time. And so they just simply asked if that teenager would be willing to leave the device away from the table for the meal so they could have some good conversation. And what happened on that?
Well, the teen actually had a fit. I mean, they didn't think they could even eat the meal without them going ballistic about not having the device there. They had to have it there. They got upset. They stomped out of the room. This is a problem.
They actually had an emotional breakdown. Would that be fair in our description here?
Yes.
Uncontrolled emotion?
Yes.
Now you would say, oh, that doesn't really, oh yes, that really happens. And if you want to try this, and we're not encouraging you to do anything that's disruptive, but if you really want to test it out, and it's not just for teenagers, find out how comfortable people are leaving their media aside from the meal table. Would that be fair? That might be a good little test to see if media is creating a frenzy in our family.
Yeah, and it's not just in the family. I mean, even with friends, when we go out, you see so many people bringing their phones to the table, and all they do is communicate with other people that aren't even at the table when they're getting together with the group. So this is a problem that is growing and growing. You walk through the city and you're running into people, or people are running into you because their faces are down here in their smartphone and they're not even attentive of what's going on around them.
You've literally been walked into.
I have.
More than once.
More than once. People are bumping into me, and that's okay. I have bumped into a few people too, usually not because of media, but because of not paying attention.
So we're just going to be talking about some of the things today. You know, there's nothing new under the sun, but some of the things that are showing themselves up in media today. If we go back to the experience of Elijah on Mount Carmel, go way back into the Old Testament where Elijah's up there. He's got a representative group of people from the tribes of Israel, God's people, got the prophets of Baal there, 400 of those prophets of Baal, and there's really a showdown happening there on Mount Carmel. And Elijah says to the people of Israel, who is on the Lord's side? Should be an easy question, right?
Well, you would think it would be that everybody would say, yeah, I'm on God's side, that He's my Lord, but that's not what happened there that day. And the reality of it is we can all get into a frenzy when things don't go well for us.
Yeah. Well, the answer that day, if you recall the story, is that they answered not a word. Now, this is actually happening in the culture of media today. Why wouldn't they answer a word? It's clear to them they're not really following Baal, but the reality of it was there was some Baal worship going on. But they knew God was more powerful. But the problem wasn't who was really more powerful. The problem was who is more popular.
That's right. Okay? Not wanting to be different.
Yeah, if I say that I'm on the Lord's side, that might not look good
That's right. We might have somebody turn against us because of that.
Exactly. That might not be politically correct to say I'm on the Lord's side. So we want to bring these Old Testament stories, these New Testament experiences, and look at how it's impacting us today. So let's read a little bit more of the context here, because there's a showdown happening, and 1 Kings 18, verses 28 and 29 says that the prophets of Baal, they cried aloud and cut themselves. Can you imagine? They're cutting themselves. Let's pause right there. Is that only happening back in the Old Testament heathen Baal worship days? Sadly enough, we can tell you that we know many young people, haven't run into too many older adults, but young people in their teen years, early 20s, who are actually, yes, cutting themselves. It's sad, but it's because things are happening that we're going to be talking about paralleling. So here they are, verse 28, they're cutting themselves, as was their custom, with knives and lances until the blood gushed out of them.
So that's not just a little slit in the skin. I mean, this is
Horrible.
yeah, this is serious.
Verse 29 says, and when midday was past, they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, but there was no voice, no one answered, and no one paid attention. So, prophets of Baal were not getting any response, doing all that they were doing, but there was a lot of frenzy going on in that
That's right.
setting right there.
And as the day wore on, it became more of a frenzy until they just didn't know how to manage themselves. Uncontrolled emotions and irritation started to happen there.
So, the parallels that are happening today are almost unbelievable in the breakdown that's taking place. And really, the idea of cutting and burning is not just something from the Old Testament heathen days.
No, it is something that is currently happening more and more and more.
And it's a reaction or an action because of stress.
That's right.
I was talking to a young man, a Uber driver, complete stranger. Okay, so I'm in the vehicle, we're talking, and the Lord just impressed me to, kind of open my heart to this young man. And he began to share, just kind of opened his heart. He had a lot of cuts on his arm, and he began to share that I'm under so much stress. I feel so much tension, and the only relief that I can find is when I cut myself. So, this is heartbreaking that this is happening today. The depression rates, suicide, all these things which we'll be talking about later, these are reactions today that are happening that shouldn't be happening, first of all.
That's right.
And I had the opportunity, and I thank God for this, I had the opportunity to open up my heart to him and share with him, and his heart was open. It just was the right words at the right time. And he was willing to open up his heart to realize that there is another way beyond where we're taken with many of the stresses of life.
That's right. That's why we're talking on this topic, because we consider this normal culture now, because it's becoming so frequent, we're so accustomed to it, that we just consider it normal. But in reality, it isn't normal, and it's really destroying many people's lives. It's destroying their homes, and it's impacting behavior until people in general are becoming more and more in this frenzy of life.
Yeah, things that are happening that are taking them out of control.
That's right.
So let's look at 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 5, because although this is New Testament, so we're a couple thousand years forward, this is now what is happening in the New Testament times, and it's giving us a picture of what's going to happen in the end of time.
That's right. The time before Jesus comes is called perilous times. And these are the signs that the Bible records, prophetic words that tell us how we will be as a people around this globe, how we will be acting, how we will be relating to life. And I think that's why our passion is to talk about the subject, because this is what we see happening, which tells us that Jesus is coming soon, and that we are excited about.
Yes. And so it says in the last days, perilous times will come, and then it gives a whole list of things that are going to be happening. The people are going to become lovers of themselves. What do you think about that? Is there a lot of self going on in the world today?
There is.
Do we struggle with self?
Absolutely.
Is
We
that
all love ourselves. I mean,
That's right.
And so it's learning how to have the proper love and respect, but not to be lovers of ourselves, right?
It says they'll be lovers of money. They'll be boasting. They'll be proud.
Blasphemers, disobedient to parents. This is another
Oh, yeah.
huge area that you see everywhere you go. Maybe you're experiencing that right in your own home. We've experienced the children being disobedient, but we saw the need to help our children learn how to be obedient. But that's an expectation that's nearly extinct today.
Yeah, unfortunately, the expectations that we see happening in today's society is that parents are trying to accommodate
And appease.
disobedience and appease their children, rather than helping their young people to come to the place where they can think rationally, understand the principles, and actually abide by things under God.
And this list continues. It's not just those things, but it continues to be unthankful, unholy, unforgiving, unloving. Those are some very strong words, and we see it happening. The more we are connected together through media around the world, the more disconnected we become on a heart level, and that's concerning.
Yeah, the sad thing, and again, we're not suggesting that media in and of itself is evil.
Not at all.
Okay? It's how media is either using us or we are using media. Okay? Let me just say that again. Is media taking advantage of us? Are we entering into what we'll talk about later as addictive behaviors? Or are we using media as a tool? Right here today, we're using media as a tool, but in many cases, media is actually driving the difference in people's hearts. Not just teenagers, not just little children.
No.
But all ages.
That's right. So going on, it continues. Slanderous. We're going to be slanderous without self-control. And this is an area that is very prevalent. People are losing control over small things, small misunderstandings, small inconveniences. People are just going out of control. And this is part of the things what's happening is before Christ's second coming. They are despisers of the good. That means they don't really want to hear what's good. They don't really want to hang around with people that's good. They just want to keep doing what they want to do and call it normal, call it life, call it whatever they want to call it.
Yeah, and it turns us, if we follow on these things, it turns us into traitors, people that are very headstrong, haughty, and lastly it says, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. That's a pretty serious picture.
It is.
Do we see it happening?
Yes, and I think that kind of sums it up, because one of the things we've noticed in media consumption is that it's more about pleasing me, what I want to find in this media. It's what I want to look at, what I want to learn, who I want to connect with. It tends to be more self-focused and more self-pleasing rather than using the media as a tool. In so many positive ways, it's being used as more of a destructive way that controls too many people.
Yeah, I mean, we know a firsthand experience, and we could give you many stories, but we know a situation, a church group of young people who are teenagers, young adults, and they have gotten into,
Media consumption.
and a kind of a clique.
Yeah.
They're just into media with themselves, and it has really borne some very sad fruit.
oftentimes what happens in those kind of settings is that in order to stay a part of the group, you do what the group does. So if everybody brings their smartphones, you have your smartphones. If they want to communicate with you through their smartphone, you communicate back with them through their smartphones. And then there's a lot of gossip that goes on back and forth, and a lot of things that happen in that, a lot of texting. Then there's a lot of social media that begins to generate from that, and it becomes something that you can see just drives these young people in this group, and that becomes the focus of how they live life, what they enjoy, and how they communicate.
Yeah, and sadly, part of what's happening, and we have firsthand experience with this situation that we're sharing, is that they're pulling back from the parents and becoming tighter and more cohesive with their friend group. But this is taking them to a place that they did not realize they were going to go to. One of the young men, for example, now has become addicted to gaming, and initially trying to hide it from the parents, and they find out that he's not sleeping well. He's staying up at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and when they find this out, they ask him, what happened? Well, this is what my friends are doing. And if I'm going to be with my friends, I want to do what the people I hang around with. And these are, quote, good Christians, okay?
That's right. Well, and then they get into the games together, and then they become very competitive, and it develops an addictive response to this, and they want to stay up with their friends. They don't want to say, well, you know what, I'm tired, or I need to go to bed, or my parents say that I can't do this past a certain hour, or whatever. They just want to hang in there and continue to do that, and it becomes something that's like a avalanche. The more it happens, the bigger it gets.
Yeah, and one of the problems that's really sad is that along with this, there's more hiding of who we are in real life, and hiding it from the parents, and it leads to lying to the parents, not being honest and truthful.
Yeah, and it's not just kids who do this. These
right.
are adults who are doing the same thing. Tend initially to be more guys in the gaming area, but now the statistics are showing that women are starting to increase their media time in the gaming arena. And so it's something that is all invasive to both male and female in how we consume media. And it really becomes, it leads to an apathy for real life and puts a desire or hunger in to live in a life that is, what'd you call it?
Yeah, well, here's the thing that really is scary. It's moving people, and this is one of the things that many people don't understand, young or old, okay, is that too much screen time, too much media, and we're going to be sharing here some staggering statistics, but what ends up happening is that there's a correlation between the amount of screen time, no matter how good the screen time is, even at the very best, the amount of screen time has a direct correlation to a growing apathy for real life. This is scary. And with it creates more and more of an appetite for having a virtual life. And many people find themselves escaping from real life responsibilities, real-time interaction with people into this more and more virtual space, which is actually dumbing down the mind. And the sad part is it creates a situation where many young people today, many young adults today are not preparing for real life. They're getting caught in the unreal arena.
Yeah, the virtual
life.
The
virtual life. Mm-hmm.
So we want to look at some statistics, research that's been done in 2023. So that was just a few months ago. It's called the silent epidemic that's eating away the minds of people.
Can you say that one more time?
A silent epidemic that's eating away the minds of people. And it's not just saying the younger mind or the teenage mind, it's all minds are being affected by the consumption of media that's out of control. It's eating away the very foundation of our minds.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah, so let's talk about what some of those things are. When it talks about media, it's specifically referring to screens. So there's all kind of screens that we use. And there's the TV, that's kind of the initial screen.
That's the old-fashioned screen.
That's the old-fashioned screen. That's where most of us started life, was on that, the TV screen. Then there's the phones, there's the tablets, there's the YouTubes, there's
Internet,
social media, internet surfing, gaming, pornography. All of these are ways and things that we see on these screens that are demanding our time. They really aren't demanding it, but we are turning over our time to these things.
Yeah, and one of the things that's very shocking is that what's happening is that there's a real-time connection with the amount of screen time that is leading to mental illness.
Yes.
Measurable mental illness.
That's right. So the U.S. is always doing studies on everything, and this is an area that many studies are being conducted on a regular basis because of the high rate of mental health issues that are increasing. And it's not just in the U.S., it's actually worldwide, but we come from the U.S., so we speak from there. But I want to tell you a story about a 10-year-old boy. He was a straight A student. He was a good child. He had great parents. His parents had Ivy League education, meaning they had the best of the best. They had good jobs. And he was doing well in school, and then he got a smartphone, 10 years old, because all his peers have phones. He needs to have a phone too. And so they gave him the phone. They thought they had the right parameters on it. But as he got this phone and he was under the influence of the peers, he started doing more and more things on this phone. And he soon found out that he started to become upset with his friends. I mean, his behavior began to change, and how he conducted himself around his friends. What are some of the other things that happened?
Oh, he started cheating on his test at school. He started becoming very hostile in games and very aggressive, very competitive. And if he didn't win the game, he completely lost it. There's that emotional out of control.
The frenzy.
Okay, the frenzy. Totally lost it, very upset and angry. And it got to the place where the parents, they saw his grades were going down. He started failing. He was a straight A student. Now he's failing in his classes. And their cry for help ended up at a pediatric psychologist office.
Yes. And when he went there, it was interesting. Before they did any great evaluation, after the parents shared what had been happening, the first thing that psychiatrist said is, let's give him a fast from all screens, not just his phone, but every screen that has influence in his life for 4 weeks. Do that for 4 weeks, come back and see me, and we're going to see what happens.
So I'm going to just pause on that. So this doesn't just slip over, over the top. This is just a worldly doctor, worldly psychologist. This isn't somebody in church saying, oh, I've got to have my kid get off all their devices because it's leading them away from the Lord. This is a psychologist saying, we're going to start with this. Just start with it. 4 weeks.
No screens.
Off of all the screens. Now, you want to go back to the frenzy? If you told a lot of people today, whether they're 10-year-old or 60 years old, that they had to be off of their screens for 4 weeks, you might have a lot of emotionally upset people.
That's right.
Because we're coming to a time right now that people feel like they can't live without their devices.
That's right. So this little boy, the parents were faithful. He had 0 screens. And it was amazing that within the first week or two, that parents actually started to see changes in their son. And by the end of 4 weeks, his grades had jumped back up. He was doing, again, A, work in school. His attitudes had improved. His temper had subsided. And he was being honest and forthright. In 4 weeks, the transformation from the bad behavior now coming back and having the child that they had known and raised was so amazing. They chose to keep the fast going a little longer, and then they chose how much time their
right.
son would be influenced by the screen.
Yeah, so the psychologist in this particular situation actually referred to the recovery as miraculous. Non-Christian, just amazing response. This is miraculous because there are such addictive tendencies, things that screens do to hook us on wanting to be on the screens more.
Yes, because whenever you go to that screen, and speaking of screens, many of us use screens for our work, many use screens for their education. So we are already being influenced by screens every day for hours a day. This is not what we're talking about. That's a part of life that, screens have blessed us with. Technology has blessed us with in being efficient in our occupations. However, it's the extra time that we're spending on those screens and the kind of media we're consuming that is making the change and the difference.
Yeah, this is talking about, just as an example, this is talking about classrooms today, okay? Part of some of this research and studies that we've done has shown that some teachers have taken the position that their students need to put their phones away when they're in class. And they've had a positive impact, although much pushback, some emotional response. But in other schools, the teachers have just gone on and let themselves, the students just do what they want to do with their phones. If they learn, they learn. If they don't, that's their problem. And it's quite a vast difference on the impacts.
That's right. So how do these screens hook us? The social media, the gaming, the scrolling of the internet, the pornography, whatever it is that we're using for the entertainment side of these, movies, YouTube shorts, they all have this same thing that we want more and more and more. It takes us out of reality and puts us in a virtual world. It takes us from responsibility and puts us in another space that we don't have to connect with all the other things that may be wanting or demanding our time.
And what many people do not understand, part of this reality that's taking people into virtual reality is the dopamine hits. So what is dopamine?
It's a neurotransmitter that helps us to have good functioning frontal lobe decision making and emotional control.
Dopamine was designed by God to be something that was a very kind of pleasurable, feels good, get out in the fresh air, walk, and that's a good response. The body loves it, the brain needs it. But people who are programming a lot of these games, the social media apps, many of them, if you research this, you'll find that they are knowingly putting dopamine-inducing hits into many of the functions. For example, on Facebook, let's say, or Instagram, when somebody likes our stuff, oh man, that's a dopamine, just a little shot of dopamine. When somebody likes our post, when somebody engages with us. But what happens to the people that don't get those likes?
Well, then they start feeling like they're not that important. They don't measure up to other people. They start internalizing that they're not as good as other people. And this often leads to the second problem, and that's being someone different than we are, right?
Yeah.
Being deceptive in how we portray ourselves, because we want our life to look as good and as fun and as pleasurable as everybody else's. So it first hits us in a negative way, and then to counteract that, our human nature wants to try to promote ourselves in some other kind of positive way that would be more acceptable amongst our peers.
Because we want to get likes. I mean, doesn't everybody want to be liked naturally? And these people that are programming these, this is why Steve Jobs, okay, he's deceased now, but many of you know he was the co-founder of Apple. This is one of the reasons why he did not allow his children to use the devices that he created, except for maybe 15 minutes a day, because he understood all the things going on the platform and what it was doing to the brain.
Yeah.
Because dopamine response is a very normal thing. But when you have dopamine hit after hit after hit, you then have to look for something that gives you more of a high. And it just like alcoholism or any other addictive behavior, you're on it more and more, which leads you to be on it for hours that you didn't intend to. I was just talking to somebody last night, and they said, I just went on there to check something that a friend of mine posted. I didn't mean to be on there for 30 minutes. And just recently said I ended up being on there for 2 hours. It's often unintentional.
That's right.
But it just hooks us and draws us in.
Research shows that 93% of people who get on this type of media are not intentionally getting on to waste hours a day. They're getting on to see something or for a short video, a YouTube clip on something, one game, but pretty soon they're there longer and longer and longer, and hours pass by. And that's the problem with the media.
You even have an experience that you don't mind being vulnerable to share.
Okay, so here goes. Knowing all this, and this is nothing new probably to you who are listening or watching this, knowing this doesn't make us
exempt
or
from,
immune, that's a better word, immune from these, the ways that this kind of media hits us. So I wanted to increase my vocabulary. I'm not the greatest with words, and I'm not the greatest speller. So I thought, oh, honey, would you give me, I know there's this app out there I've heard about. Can you find that for me? And I want to challenge myself to learn more, to be a better speller, and to see letters and actually see words in those letters instead of a bunch of letters. So he found one for me, and it was really nice. And I started to interact with this little game online, this app. And as I'm going along, I noticed that as I found words in this scramble, and I could put them in the what do you call that thing? The grid. As I could fill in the grid, what happened is I started getting these little like coins up in the corner. These little.
You were getting rewards.
I was getting rewards, and I liked it.
Did that feel good?
It did feel good.
Did you know you were getting a dopamine response?
I didn't know that at the time, but I understand it now. I mean, because we're not thinking cognizantly or conscientiously about...
Consciously, that's not our intention. That wasn't your intention. But
no.
Did you like it when you got coins?
I did. Well,
no, they weren't coins dumping out of the phone.
Yeah, too bad.
They were up in the corner.
Yeah, it was my little reward. And so what I found is it was motivating me. And then all of a sudden, one day, they went away. And I said to Hugh, how did that happen? I must have hit something, done something wrong. And then I realized that some of these I was losing because they also had a timer that they wanted you to find all these words to fill out the entire grid with these letters in a certain amount of time. Well, again, that's not my strength. And I wasn't meeting the time. So that became pressure for me. And I was determined to try to get it done. So I kept doing it more and more. And the next thing I found out started happening to me was I was picking up my phone more often in the day when I had 5 minutes or 10 minutes just to see if I could get a couple more of these little...
You wanted to get your coins back.
I wanted to get my coin back. And
the
I
focus
also
started changing.
Yes, and I also wanted to challenge myself and see if I could get it done in the time.
Because you could get more coins.
Because I could get more coins for sure.
So that's a real example.
It is. And so after a couple of months of this, I started to feel tension and stress, especially when I got on that app. And I started feeling that pressure to perform and to prove I could do this. And it became almost compulsive for me. And I turned to my husband one day and I said, honey, I am experiencing addictive behavior. I could identify it myself. I never thought I could be addicted to a little simple word game, but I was being driven by it. And it was quite a wake-up call for me. And I said, I am taking that off. I will learn another way, but this is not helping me. This is creating in me a new level of stress and addiction that I wasn't accustomed to.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. It's a real life example.
It is real
It's very simple. But here's something that's very, almost probably unknown to most people, and that is that the way some of these social media platforms are designed, they want to keep you there forever, okay? When we're in normal life, what we'll call normal life, we have endings to stories. We have an end to a movie. we have an ending to, a news clip.
That's right. We have an ending to.
There's an ending, there's some closure. So what's it like?
Like an end of a day. Go to
Social
bed.
media, could you just keep scrolling?
Social media doesn't end. I mean, as long as you're willing to sit there and scroll, it will keep going and going and going. You can click on somebody else's account and somebody else's account and somebody else's account, and it's never ending. You can't out scroll and out.
What do they call that? Doom scrolling.
Doom scrolling.
Doom scrolling. What is that? Does that sound like a real positive thing? Doom scrolling. Doom doesn't sound very good.
No.
That's because of the impact that it has on the brain. Because we just keep scrolling, looking for something else. Because what we don't realize is that we're needing that dopamine. And this is why people can become addicted to social media just as a way of life and actually start losing their way in normal life.
That's right.
Not doing normal things.
Because they live out in the virtual. They live out in the.
Or they're hiding, they're not doing their schoolwork, and they don't want to do their schoolwork because they're caught up in the gaming or they're caught up in social media, so they start lying to the parents. This is another thing that happens, and it's not a good end.
Yeah, and it's not just social media where the scrolling happens. It's also internet surfing. I mean, this can happen just looking up a YouTube short, and it's one thing you want to see, and you watch that 4-minute clip,
right.
and that's all you went there for. But the next thing you know, the whole sidebar is loaded with similar things that capture your interest, and you click on another one, and then you click on another one. And pretty soon, you're there again for a long period of time, and they're endless. There's
Yes.
more and more there.
So the most current research is talking about how many hours that people are now spending on media, okay? Screens. So let's divide the day up into 24 hours. Let's give 8 hours, because this is what the study did. 8 hours to sleep, 8 hours
For work or
for
school?
work, school, and then there's how many hours left?
8 hours.
Another 8 hours. The average person in this most recent study spends 7.5 hours a day on screens outside of work and outside of school. That means, well, what does that mean?
That means that what's happening is the other things we did during those 8 hours, like taking care of ourselves, showering, making a meal, eating, cleaning up, doing chores, talking to family, running errands, all these other things that were in this 8 hours, bits and pieces, are now being consumed on a screen.
Being pushed aside.
While adults know how to navigate life better because we've learned life skills, what research is showing, the crisis that's right ahead of us, and actually we're entering in, is for younger people, children and youth, teens, who haven't necessarily learned these life skills. They don't learn them at all. And so when they get into life and things get difficult or challenging, they perceive them challenging, they just want to escape to the virtual world.
Yes. So we adults, or people that have had more life experience, can get by a little bit better because at least we knew how to develop these things. We have skills that we can function in. But if these are being missed because there's no time for learning these skills, it doesn't put us in a very good place as we grow into adulthood.
That's right. And the other issue is, or the other aspect is that not only are we, even adults, when we're spending that 7 or 8 hours a day on screens outside of our normal work, that means that we're not doing other things as well. Most people are cutting into their sleep time.
Yeah.
And more employers are seeing that their employees are cutting into work time. I went into a store recently, and the person who's to check your stuff when you walk out the door, when I came in the store, they had a cell phone in their hand, and they were scrolling. They didn't even see me come in the store or anybody else coming in the store. When I got my things and was coming out the door, they didn't bother to check my bag. They were just still in the same position doing the same thing. 20 minutes later, they're in the same position doing the same thing. So this is a problem that is affecting us, and it is a media frenzy out there that we are concerned about as a society.
So we're not going to be able to get through all of this in this segment, so we're going to have a part 2 on this. But before we leave you on this first part, we want to just ask you to take inventory. And if you're afraid of taking inventory of how you're using your devices, your screen time, or if you're afraid that you might have to change that, that's all the more reason that we need to be asking God to help us open our eyes, that we can really see where we're at and what we're going through. And so we can make adjustments that will make us better people, that will give us a better way of life, and really better social life. So we'll have you join us for part 2.